Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video I'm taking a look at these 3 new Supertramp reissues, all half-speed mastered at Abbey Road by Miles Showell. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Supertramp. The Logical song was one of the first singles I ever bought when I was 12 years old, and it felt like a real step up, a bit more grown up than what I've been listening to before. I didn't have any Supertramp albums at the time, but I got into them a few years later, starting with Live in Paris. These new editions have all been half-speed mastered at Abbey Road by Miles Showell and pressed at Pallas in Germany. So on paper, they tick a lot of boxes that collectors and audiophiles are looking for. One thing that's worth noting is that it must have been a difficult task for Miles, as rumours suggest that most, if not all, Supertramp's original master tapes were lost in the Universal fire in Los Angeles in 2008. So what we're hearing here is likely the result of working with the best available sources, rather than the original masters. And once you factor in the age of the tape on an album like Breakfast in America, for example, and how many times it's likely been run over the years, it's not an easy album for anyone to get right. And yet listening to this, I think Miles has managed it. The sound is clean, clear, and very dynamic, but what really stood out to me was the low end. It feels fuller and more solid, with a bit more weight than on the original, and that just makes it a more satisfying listen. As with the previous 2 Supertramp remasters, Crisis What Crisis and Crime of the Century, Miles wasn't working on his own. For these 3 albums, he was joined by original engineer and co-producer Peter Henderson, who sat alongside him throughout the process, helping select the sources and approving everything before any cutting began. Released in 1977, Even in the Quietest Moments is where Supertramp really settled into their sound. It's probably fair to say that this isn't their most naturally audiophile recording in their catalogue, but it still comes across very well here, and everything sits together nicely. It's very much a piano-led album, with a lot of acoustic elements, but it also opens out into some bigger arrangements. Tracks like Give a Little Bit and Fool's Overture show both sides of that, from the more direct to the more ambitious. Listening to this, the first thing that stood out was the sense of space. It sounds clean and open, especially in the quieter parts, and it's just very easy to listen to. Released in 1979, Breakfast in America is the one that really breaks them wide open. It's more polished and very precisely produced, without losing what made them distinctive, and that's particularly relevant here. This was never the simplest mix to start with. There's a noticeable dip in the mid-range and quite a lift at the top end, which has always made it a difficult record to get right. You've got the Logical song, Goodbye Stranger, Take the Long Way Home, all of them strong individually, but also part of a very cohesive album. It went on to become their biggest album, particularly in the US, and it's easy to hear why. So hearing it again like this, you already know how it should sound, and that's where these pressings really work. There's a lot going on in the arrangements, and it can very quickly start to feel congested if it's not handled well. But here, it all holds together nicely. The 1982 Mobile Fidelity pressing has always been high on many people's lists as one of the best-sounding versions of this album. But listening to this, I have to say I prefer this new cut. The MFSL is impressively quiet, but this one comes across as more solid and tighter overall, particularly through the low end. You can hear some of the careful, almost surgical work that's gone into reducing pops and clicks, and that really adds to the finesse of the sound. With Even in the Quietest Moments, it's a slightly different picture. My Canadian A&M audiophile and 1980s Dutch pressings probably have a bit more top-end detail, but the new remaster has a noticeably richer and deeper low end, and that makes it quite difficult to separate them in terms of which I actually prefer. By 1982, with Famous Last Words, the sound starts to change a bit. It's a more polished early 80s sound and a bit more fuller overall.
Oh, it's raining again.
Like Breakfast in America, it was a major commercial success, reaching #1 in several countries, and It's Raining Again was a sizable hit. On this one, what stood out more was the overall balance. There's more low-end weight and a bit more going on in the mix, but it stays controlled. It doesn't tip over into anything muddy, which is always the risk with this kind of production. Now let me tell you about one of the ways I've been listening to these albums, which is with these, the new Meze 99 Classics. These are the second generation of Meze's 99 Classics, a model I reviewed a couple of years ago. They still have the same distinctive look with these solid walnut ear cups, and thanks to its self-adjusting headband, they're also extremely comfortable. You can quite happily listen for long periods without really thinking about them. The ear cups are slightly larger this time, and they've added a small bass port just above the cable sockets. You can also remove the pads and add these acoustic absorbers if you want to tune the sound, although I preferred them without. In terms of how they sound, I found these gave me a more neutral and balanced presentation than the original 99 Classics, which were a bit more bass forward. These still sound engaging and natural, but just a bit more controlled overall. They're also very versatile. You can use them with a hi-fi setup, but also just as easily with a phone, thanks to the included USB-C adapter with its own built-in DAC. They sit towards the more accessible end of Meze's range, but they don't feel compromised because of that. I wouldn't necessarily use these for serious high-end listening. For that, you'd be looking at something like the fantastic 109 Pros. But for everyday listening, especially from a phone, they work extremely well. Now, Meze did send me these headphones for review, but they didn't tell me what to say, and all the opinions I've expressed here are my own. If you're interested, you can get 20% off using the code GRAM20, not just on the 99 Classics, but on these other headphones too. There's a link in the description, and the offer runs for 2 weeks from the publication of this video. So overall, this is a very strong set of reissues. They're well pressed, the sound is clean and balanced, and there's a real sense of richness and depth to the low end. And that just makes them more enjoyable to listen to. They may not replace the original pressings, but they offer a very enjoyable and accessible way into these albums. And if you already own them, they're well worth hearing for a slightly different perspective. Pallas also seems to have upped their quality control here. The vinyl is noticeably quieter than on the earlier reissues of Crime of the Century and Crisis What Crisis, which is definitely a step in the right direction. But don't forget, one of the mottos of this channel, which is, just trust your ears. If you've bought these new pressings or just love these albums, let me know what you think about them in the comments. I'll be back at the weekend with the students as they listen to another Beatles album for the first time. But that's all for this one, so I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.